nobody's watching yet. Oh, do you know Sarah Winicky?
Yeah, I do actually.
Yeah, I thought you must. Sarah's
Yeah.
just liked it, so maybe she'll jump in. She always interacts with my tweets, which I love. So, oh, do you have a drink? Is the other question in case you
Yeah,
get a
I
dry
do. I
mouth.
have a water
Good.
bottle with me because, yeah, I do get very parched when I talk for
Yeah.
extended periods of time. So,
Yeah. Good. 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 Okay. All right. I'm going to put that countdown on again. So yes, we've got 39 seconds to have a drink. Now, what I'm going to do is introduce you, then I'm going to ask you to talk
okay.
about the lab and your study,
Mhm.
and then I'm going to ask you a bit about cowbirds in general, and then we're going to get right into heavy duty cowbirds.
All right. Sounds great.
Cool. And yeah, it'll be less chatty than normal. Oh, someone's watching. That's good. Are we ready? Hello, bird nerds. I'm Grant Williams. This is the Bird Emergency. I am a bird nerd. I'm speaking with you from the wonderful city of Melbourne, also known as Naarm in the Indigenous language. I would like to, on this new beginning day for Australia, pay my respects to the traditional owners and their ancestors and their leaders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, Hannah. I was going to say it. Hello, Hannah Scharf. You are speaking with me from the University of Illinois. You're the cowbird girl. How are you? Not
I'm,
nice to see you.
yeah, nice to see you too. Yeah, I'm doing great. Just had a lovely day of field work today. Lots of thunderstorms in the area. So, fingers crossed that all the birds make it through.
Great. Well, Hannah is from the University of Illinois. Now, Illinois is pretty fresh in bird emergency memory because we've just had the epic conversation with Jared Hitchings about the Prothonorary Warbler. Now, there's a nice link with the Prothonorary Warbler and the cowbirds. Hannah, you're doing a PhD at the moment. You referenced your field work a minute ago. Tell us what the PhD is about, and I love your website where you talk about the Cowbird Lab. What's the lab really called?
Yeah, so I am just finishing up my fourth year, going into my fifth year of my PhD at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And so I'm in what we kind of call and that is actually the lab of my advisor, Dr. Mark Halber. And so he has studied cowbirds for years. And most of us in the lab study brood parasitism in some way, shape, or form. But we might just study different hosts or different aspects of brood parasitism.
And the do you have a topic with the PhD? Like, is there one thing that you're trying to answer or understand, or is it generally about the behaviour of cowbirds? And of course, we're going to have to very quickly introduce what cowbirds are to anyone who is not in North America.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior, and my focus is on host-parasite interactions between brown-headed cowbirds and one of their hosts, the Prothonorary Warblers. So I study the ways in which recognition of brood parasites might occur, and also the costs that brood parasites impose on their hosts. And so I kind of study different aspects of behavior or physiology through that. And so if you're listening and you don't know what a cowbird is, cowbirds are actually brood parasites, meaning that they never take care of their own young. So most birds, build their own nests and they raise their offspring. But cowbirds actually never do that. They never, ever, ever build their own nests. They always parasitize the nest of another bird species, and they let that bird species kind of care for the offspring and raise them.
So, how many species of cowbirds are there? And you're in the northern portion of the USA. How many have you got in your neighbourhood?
Yeah, so we just have the one, which is the most. It covers it covers the United States, Canada, into Mexico, and so it's the farthest reaching cowbird throughout the United States, and it's the brown-headed cowbird. We have several other species of cowbird, such as the shiny cowbird, screaming cowbird, bronze cowbird, giant cowbird. I might be missing one, but just a couple of other species that you can find in Middle and South America.
The screaming cowbird, is that right? Where does that hang out?
Yeah, so most of the other cowbirds are further south than the brown-headed cowbird. Some of them are kind of creeping north just a little bit. But screaming cowbirds, I believe, are mostly kind of in Argentina.
Okay, well, that's a great, just a magnificent name. Do you know if they sound like a murder bird?
I don't. I've never seen one. I don't actually know what sound they make, but I believe they are probably named after the kind of sound they make. But I'm not sure.
I will chase that up and do the link below, as they say. For those people who are not in the Americas, cowbirds basically play the role that cuckoos play in most of the rest of the world, but there's some significant differences about how they behave when they're victimizing their host. Let's say so that what is the actually no let's start right at the beginning. Sorry about that, everyone. You're studying the relationship with the Prothonorary Warbler, but what other species, or are there any other species that the brown-headed cowbird parasitize?
Yeah, so the brown-headed cowbird is what's known as a generalist brood parasite, meaning that there isn't one particular host that it specializes in. It's actually been documented to parasitize over 200 other species of birds. Not all of those successful, but so they parasitize a lot of other species. Like you might find them in northern cardinal nests. Sometimes, occasionally they'll parasitize robins or catbirds, which will reject the cowbird egg. But overall, most species actually accept cowbird eggs. And cowbirds are kind of originally like a Great Plains bird. They're called cowbirds because they're insectivores, and they really like to follow around big, like large herbivorous mammals like bison or cows, and so they just kind of follow those animals around and eat any of the bugs that kind of come out of the grass. So they're mostly known for parasitizing species out there like dick thistles, but now their range is kind of expanded, and so they pretty much parasitize whatever they can find.
Are they in their behaviour, apart from following bison around, are they? I'm trying to place them in a context for maybe Australians or those in Europe. Are they like a pipit or a wagtail or a blackbird? I mean, when they're not just hanging around the bison, looking for grasshoppers and whatnot,
Mhm.
are they a bird that will use shrubbery? Are they a social bird? Tell us a bit about what they do when they're not nesting.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the times I mean, I definitely see them around cows a lot, but also I'll just see them if there's like a large grass yard or even off like the side of the road or something. You might see a couple cowbirds just kind of walking through the grass, picking out things to eat. And so usually they will be in groups. They won't just be alone. It might be a male and a couple females, or it might be more than one male. Otherwise, I don't really see them hanging out in shrubbery that much. They might be on the ground or they might kind of be high up in trees. And from anecdotal experience, every time I go out in the yard and there's cowbirds, they immediately fly away. They seem more wary of me than, say, a Prothonorary Warbler would, although they're probably much easier to find, say, like in your own neighborhood or kind of in more urban areas.
So they don't like hanging around with you, Hannah.
No.
But you said they've been classified as expanding, so that would suggest to me, so tell me if I'm on the wrong track, that they adapt very well to human habitation, that they like it when we disturb a habitat and change it. They can take advantage of that.
Yeah, so you typically won't find cowbirds in deep forests, but since now we've kind of carved up the forests and really kind of fragmented these habitats, they now kind of have more range to expand into, and so now they have their sort of foraging areas, which might be in agricultural areas, kind of right next to these forests with birds that they might not have historically interacted with, but are interacting more with now.
Is that common amongst other cowbirds? Do you know? Like, are they all adaptable in that way, or are some of them far more specialised in the habitats that they will be successful in?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure about the other cowbirds. Some of the other cowbirds are generalists, and we also have some specialist cowbirds as far as what host they'll use. But as far the habitats they use, I believe they're also mostly sort of open area oriented versus like deep forest.
Okay, let's talk a bit more about the relationship with the Prothonorary warbler. The Prothonorary warbler is a migratory species. So, is the brown-headed cowbird also a migratory species?
They are somewhat migratory. So I believe kind of more out in the western United States, they might migrate south out of some of those areas, and other areas they'll actually stay resident. So it kind of depends on which area of Canada or the United States they are. But they definitely do not migrate as far as Prothonorary warblers.
Okay. Do, do you know where they go? Like, will they be just looking for similar type of habitat? Do they need herds of bison or herds of domestic cattle to be able to move on masse? Like, do you think historically they would have followed the movement of the bison across the Great Plains?
I think historically I think they would be somewhat tied to the bite. I mean, they're maybe a little bit more successful around those around the bison, kind of foraging and everything. But as far as to specifically what areas they're migrating to, I'm not entirely sure, and I'm not sure if there have been tracking studies done specifically on cowbirds. But I think most of the regions they migrate out of are mountainous, like out in the western United States, and so it's probably just because it gets way too cold.
So it might be an altitudinal movement rather than anything else, and that they are just waiting to hold a welcoming party for the Prothonorary Warbler when they come back from their trip to the mangroves of Central America.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, your specialty is the behaviour in the nest and the relationship with the host. So I'm wondering about the mating behaviour, pair bonds, or anything like that with cowbirds. Do they pair up? Are they monogamous, or just give us an idea of what happens before the chicks arrive?
Yeah, so it can vary a little bit, but for the most part, cowbirds, along with most other brood parasites, are actually monogamous.
Okay, so do they defend a territory around their chosen nests, and do they will a pair parasitize a number of nests of the host, or is it one egg and that, or two or three eggs into the one nest?
Yeah, so the females actually move a lot throughout the day. So they have where they roost, and they have their foraging sites, which are out, kind of in more open areas, maybe out in agricultural spaces. And then they actually will fly into the forests right before sunrise. So cowbirds are actually kind of specific in that way, where a lot of cuckoos might lay throughout the day. Cowbirds will only lay specifically right before sunrise, before the host gets back to her nest and lays an egg. And so females kind of have quite a large range that they'll occupy throughout the day. And as far as how much they specialized, we don't have a ton of evidence on that. It's super interesting. I would love for us to know more, but it seems like some cowbirds might specialize a little bit more on which host they like, but they usually will parasitize at least a couple of different species of hosts. But at our sites here, we know genetically, because we take blood samples from the cowbird chicks and we can do genetic work on that. We know that there have been some females that have come year after year parasitizing our warblers, and so they actually seem like they like that specific area and they like that specific host. But they could also be parasitizing other hosts in the forest. There's plenty of other birds out there. So,
do you focus your research on the females, or have you got a pretty good handle on what the males are doing during the day?
So the females, I would love to study female cowbirds more because I think they're super interesting. They're just very hard to study because, like I said, they're very skittish. So we can't really catch them in the forest. They are not really interested in playback that much. And if you set up a mist net, they just kind of fly away. They really are kind of suspicious of us. So if we try to catch female cowbirds to see what they're doing, one of the things that we do is we actually set up nest box traps. And so you kind of have to get in the mindset of a female cowbird and think, okay, which nests, might she parasitize the next morning? What kind of scenes at the optimal time? What we do is we actually go out there before sunrise, so it's still mostly dark out, and you have a headlamp on and you're kind of trudging through the swamp trying to find the nest box. And we put this little trap in the nest box that essentially had a little lever so that when the female cowbird jumps in, she kind of hits this little this little perch, and it will shut a trap door behind her. And so she gets there before the host gets there because she parasitizes before sunrise. And so that's before most birds are active. I was able to catch a female that way. And it's really cool. You turn off your headlamp and it's like pitch dark, but there's just enough light where you can kind of see the nest box. And so you can kind of see this dark figure come through the forest, and she lands on the nest box, but she can't really quite remember exactly where the nest entrance is. So she's looking around a lot. She's like, I know it's here somewhere. And she actually took enough time trying to get to the nest where the warbler came back, and the warbler was trying to attack her a little bit, but cowbirds are a bit bigger than warblers, and so she didn't mind at all. She got on that nest, she laid her egg, and the trap deployed, so we were able to catch her and tag her, but she didn't appear at any of our nest boxes again. So they're tricky ones for sure.
I want to ask you in a minute to go through the whole process of the field work, the study each season, and how you do it. But I don't think we sort of covered off. Do you know that Mrs. Cowbird, or probably she sounds like she's a pretty progressive lady. She's probably a Ms. Is she visiting several?
Sorry,
No,
I think
that's
you got to
me.
cut out there a little bit.
Yeah, I think I did, but I think we're back, aren't we?
Yeah, I can hear you now. So
Yeah,
you asked,
and
is she visiting several?
yeah, it like it in a day of the
Mm-hmm,
female cowbird, where before dawn she's
mm-hmm.
arrived at your nest box and
Yeah.
deposited one egg. Is she going off to lay another egg on the same day, or is she going to be repeating that on subsequent mornings?
Yes, so most birds can only lay one egg a day. That's all they really have the aptitude for. So she'll only be laying that one egg that morning, but then she might be laying her next egg the very next day. Cowbirds can lay quite a few eggs. There are reports of up to 40 eggs in a season.
Wow,
So yeah, she's got a lot of work to do.
wow, wow! Yeah, I'd never heard that before. I wondered, do you know, is that common with other parasitic birds? I hate when I say parasite, I think of a louse or a flea, something like that.
Yeah.
Are cuckoos that prolific in terms of their egg laying ability? Do you know?
Yeah, I know cuckoos can lay quite a few eggs as well. I think there was actually like back in the day, there were two like British scientists that had a competition seeing how many eggs they could collect, but I don't remember what the number was. But I know that other brood parasites can be quite prolific as well in the number of eggs that they'll lay.
Well, that's eye opening for me. That's so okay. Let's so we know it's many nests.
Hmm.
The Does that mean that there's multiple mating sessions happening with the cowbird pair, or does it all happen at the front end of the season and then the eggs are just coming out day by day, or is the male got to be busy as well?
Yeah, the females should be able to store sperm somewhat, but I imagine that they probably mate multiple times. He's trying to kind of assure his paternity, and so I'm sure it's not just the once.
And is he aggressively defending a territory?
I don't think, for the most part, they're not like for the warblers, the males have these very specific territories where they nest, and they're very aggressive guarding them. The cowbirds don't have quite as set territories as breeding birds, I would say. But I think they have their typical spots that they like to go every day.
So a cowbird pair are going to have to find many warbler pairs to parasitize. Are they very successful, do you think, with other species within the same range? Like I know, watching your Twitter, you've put robin eggs up, and that robins reject them generally. But what others, like I'm trying to get an idea of in maybe a couple of, I mean, are the territories the size of a couple of acres? Is
Yeah, so I can't remember the acreages off the top of my head, but like I said, the females do move quite a bit throughout the day, more than the males, because they're actually searching for nests. For the most part, in the brown-headed cowbird, as far as we know, the males aren't really helping the females out. The females are kind of doing all the nest searching and all of that by themselves. There are other species of brood parasites where it seems like males are a little bit more apt to actually help females, or I think it's been described in like there's like a cuckoo species maybe where the male actually kind of distracts the hosts while the female goes in and lays her egg. But yeah.
I think we've covered off pretty much how they do what they do.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the process of collecting the data that you need in the field work. So, the start of the season, what do you have to prepare? What do you set up? And then can you sort of take us through, week by week, day by day, and what you're doing? And I'm really interested how you record the data to make it easy to analyze at the end of the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we put up nest boxes kind of early in March, so that way when the warblers get here, usually the males get here first and they kind of set up their territories and females come and choose. And so basically it's most important that those nest boxes get up so that there's something for them to kind of prospect and want to nest in. Then we go out and we grease all of we have the nest boxes on these two poles that are taped together. And so we grease the bottom of the poles so that things like raccoons can't climb up and get to the nest. It's not totally foolproof. I've had snakes climb up and still get into the nest and eat the entire brood. But for the most part, it works really well. We have very low rates of nest predation. And so kind of in those beginning stages, we go through and we check the nest from day to day. So the males will start out by putting just a little bit of moss in the nest box, and the females kind of seem to ultimately choose where the nest will go, and she'll build it all herself using different mosses and things from the swamp. So she'll build that cup, and then eventually she'll lay usually 4 to 5 eggs, one a day. Incubate those for about 12 days, and then we've got chicks for about 10 days before they fledge. And so as far as the data collection goes, we usually, for my projects, I try to get to the sites at least every other day to really kind of, see what's going on. We see if there are any cowbird eggs, because sometimes the cowbirds kind of mess up a little bit. They should optimally lay when there's at least one warbler egg in the nest and before she's incubating. But sometimes they're not quite that great, or maybe they just don't have a lot of options. So a lot of times we might find just one egg in the nest and it's a cowbird egg. And usually the female warbler will abandon that nest because she hasn't started laying yet and she knows it's not hers. And so depending on the experiment, I move cowbird eggs around a lot to stimulate experimental parasitism. So that way I can actually kind of make sure that any effects that I see aren't because of the choice of the brood parasite. So if, there are certain nests that seem to get parasites more than others or might be easier to find. And so that's kind of our day to day. I also catch all of the male and female warblers. So the males we catch through playback. We put up these big mist nets, and we have this little ornament that's just this sort of bird shape, and we painted it to look like a Prothonorary Warbler. And so we play male song, and he usually gets very interested in that, and he wants to attack whatever male's on his territory. And so we'll catch him in the mist net and basically put some bands on him, take a little blood sample, and then let him go. And the females we usually catch while they're incubating, because only the females incubate, so we can actually just stick a bag quickly over the entrance. She'll fly out into it, and we just catch her that way. And so we give all the warblers what's known as a pit tag. So we have these little sort of data loggers on the back of each nest box. They're RFID recorders, and it's kind of the same technology. If you go to a store and if you've ever like walked through the door and the that same sort of technology. Yeah. So basically, anytime a warbler with a pit tag lands into a nest entrance, we get a log of who it was, what nest box they were at, and what time it was,
and how long they were there. Because it records in and out, doesn't it?
Yeah. So we can't quite tell whether they're going in or out because it's only the one.
Yeah, it's just proximity. Yeah.
Yeah, but it'll record. It'll give us a recording if the bird is longer than their 8 seconds, and then it'll keep recording. So we also get sort of a rough estimation of how long they're sitting there. Yeah.
And then you can draw some inferences about what they're doing because they don't just sit on the top of the box.
No.
No. So, can we just go back to the eggs for a minute?
Yeah.
What does a Prothonorary Warbler egg look like in comparison to a brown-headed cowbird egg?
Yeah, so the warbler eggs are a little bit smaller than the cowbird eggs usually, although there's some variation. Cowbird eggs I've seen a couple of cowbird eggs that are actually even smaller than the warbler eggs, but usually they're smaller. Prothonorary warbler eggs kind of have this more reddish hue to them. So they have a mostly kind of like white, maybe like off-white beige color backgrounds, and then they have these reddish spots on them. And usually those red spots are maybe concentrated on the blunter end of the egg. But the spotting and the exact size can kind of vary from female to female. They all kind of have their special, eggs.
So sorry, Hannah, the point of that was just to find out whether cowbirds are egg mimics, and it sounds like they're not really. It's similar enough so that the warbler doesn't know, but that the warbler isn't a great examiner of its own eggs. Is that what makes the robins reject the cowbird eggs?
Yeah, so we don't think that cowbirds are really egg mimics of any species because they are such generalist parasites. Their eggs do actually look a lot like some other eggs, like cardinal eggs, for example. They look a lot alike. And even I can sometimes occasionally be confused between a Prothonorary warbler egg and a cowbird egg, because even though the cowbird eggs are larger and they're usually more of a blue background and then kind of brown spots, at least at the sites that we are at. Like I said, the size can vary and the colors can kind of vary. And so I've occasionally had to kind of have a second glance at them. With the robins, we don't entirely know why exactly a robin might have, more of a propensity to reject than a warbler. It could be that robins are a lot bigger than really grasp the cowbird eggs and remove them from the nest. Whereas prothonotary warblers probably cannot. So even if a prothonotary warbler were to recognize a cowbird egg, whether it could actually remove that egg is kind of another question.
What? How often? How often are you catching the cowbirds? The warblers are in and out of the nest all the time during the season, but the cowbird may only turn up once. So, I guess what I'm wanting to know is the key to your research understanding what one female cowbird is inflicting on one warbler nest, or are you needing to monitor dozens of warbler nests and then try and sort out which female cowbirds are preying on those different nests? Like, what's the focus? The warbler or the cowbird?
Yeah, I would say most of my research focus has been more on the warblers just because they're a lot easier to study. I've really been itching to catch more cowbirds, but actually the site where we know that females are kind of showing up from year to year that has more of a stable group of female cowbirds that are parasitizing has very mysteriously not gotten any parasitism in the past 2 years. When in the past it's been a very reliable, source of cowbird eggs where I was getting, like at least 20 a season. And the cowbirds are still there. There's actually a farm that's right next to the forest. You can hear the cows mooing from, the warbler territories. And the cowbirds are there. I hear them occasionally in the forest, but for whatever reason, they have stopped parasitizing those nests. And so I haven't really gotten a great chance to start catching those birds again.
It sounds a little bit like. I mean, here's me, the non-scientist, applying my logic. It sounds like the cowbirds are deliberately not competing with the warblers for food. The warblers are feeding in one distinct habitat type, and that the cowbirds are moving out and just coming back to the warbler territory to drop the eggs. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, so they definitely, the cowbirds are not really in the forest to feed at all. They're just there for the nests for the most part. It could be that they're not parasitizing at that site anymore because I personally, from my experiments, have been moving cowbird eggs around a lot. And so if they're coming back and actually noticing that their egg is gone, which we do have evidence that cowbirds are actually coming back to check on their nest success, that they're like, whoa, hey, this is no longer a good source of nest to parasitize, and that they've just kind of, they're not doing it anymore.
I mean, that raises a question. Sorry, Hannah. Yeah. That raises a question about whether the methodology would need to be altered. Probably you're not going to be doing your PhD for another 5 years, I would assume. But maybe your postdoc, if you want to keep focusing on these two species in postdoc work, you might need to have a control site where you don't move cowbird eggs, and then try and mirror that site somewhere else where you do move eggs, and then see if that behaviour is repeated in the second or third year where this group of female cowbirds stop using those nests in that patch. I mean, I'm wondering what you have. Oh no, what have you actually been able to determine? What can you say for sure you now know about either warblers or
Mhm.
cowbirds?
Yeah, so as far as the kind of queuing and all their success, I personally haven't done that experiment, but that experiment has been done before in my system by other researchers. And so we know that they queue in on their success, but some of the sites might be more specific than others. As far as, sometimes like the site that I'm talking about, the cowbirds are very specific, they come year after year and they seem kind of more invested in that specific site. So we do know that they are definitely keeping track of their eggs, and so moving them around experimentally definitely has effects on their what they'll parasitize, and also the success of the offspring. So if the offspring are successful, the cowbirds will be more likely to kind of parasitize in that area. But as far as kind of what I've done with all of my research, I've looked at different aspects of, so if we want to go back to the topic of recognition, like I said, even if the warblers recognize the egg, the cowbird egg, it's maybe not super likely that they could actually remove it because they have, just those little insectivorous bills, and they've, a huge egg. Also, they're nesting in a cavity, so they kind of only got that one entrance to dump it out of. And also there's the risk that if they try to puncture that cowbird egg, they might injure their own eggs, or they might make a mistake and they might accidentally toss one of their own eggs out and not the cowbird egg. But one of the experiments that I did with the warblers was to see if one way to see if they recognize the cowbird egg at all. So what I did was I put mimetic and non-mimetic eggs into their nest, and then I also had a control where I didn't add anything to their nest. And I caught them again 2 hours later, the incubating female. So I gave her, the egg, and then caught her 2 hours later. And I took a blood sample from her to test the level of corticosterone, which is a hormone that's released in response to a stressor. So it's cortisol in humans, and it's, if you've kind of encountered this big stressor, your cortisol, or in birds, your corticosterone levels will rise, and that kind of helps you to sort of deal with that stressor, or, kind of deal with this very stressful situation and have a higher probability of surviving it.
So
And I actually, sorry, go ahead.
if a non-ornithologist is listening or watching, Hannah, tell them what mimetic is. Your mimetic eggs.
Yeah, so the mimetic eggs are much closer, they're much closer in color to the warbler eggs. And a non-mimetic egg, we used a blue egg, which is completely, the warbler eggs are kind of, a beige with like red spots. And then we put a non-mimetic, which was blue. And then the mimetic was, much more similar looking to the warbler egg, which was kind of a beige color. Yeah.
So, in your lab at the University of Illinois, the Cowbird Lab, is the team cooperating so that the data that you're getting on warblers is feeding in, and that and you're getting data on cowbirds? But is there somebody else doing different work on cowbirds, and that you're pooling it all to get a better understanding in general of these two species and their nesting behaviour? Or are you specifically attempting to answer one or two specific things? Because it sounds like it's very difficult to tie one thing down just simply because of the way the cowbirds behave.
Yeah. So I realized I should have said the results of that experiment just real quickly. I didn't find any differences in corticosterone between the females that got mimetic versus non-mimetic versus no egg addition. So it seems, at least that's another line of evidence that points towards they actually don't recognize the cowbird egg. And it's probably because of something called evolutionary lag, which is, they've only been parasitized by the cowbirds somewhat recently. And so they just haven't had the time to kind of have responses to adapt to that. And as far as other research in the lab, so there's been a lot of research in this system. And so it's, kind of coming from different angles. So I have a lab mate, Nick Antonsen, who actually has also studied the warblers and the cowbirds the same time that I've been here, but he's kind of studied more of the cowbird nestling competition aspect and kind of exactly what they're doing there with some nest cameras, and then also different physiological measurements. So as far as putting the pieces together, yeah, it is kind of very incremental as far as, okay, we can answer, this one very specific thing, that gives us some more information. But I'm lucky to work in a system that's had years of research done. And so we know, a decent amount about what's happening in the system that we can kind of move off of. Whereas a lot of other brood parasites have almost no research done on them whatsoever.
You mentioned that Nick is focusing on competition between the nestlings. Mm-hmm. So that's something that I think people will always think about with brood parasitism, and that they are cuckoos, for instance, generally some species are ejecting the other nestlings if possible. Otherwise, they just dwarf them and outcompete them for food. There's 2 points about competition I want to ask you about. So if you know about it, can you talk about the competition within the nest? But I'm also interested, again, because we don't have cowbirds here and we have cuckoos. You have cuckoos in the same geographic overlay as the cowbirds. So are adult cowbirds and cuckoos competing for resources or for space, like essentially competing for hosts, or are there no cuckoos who are targeting the Prothonorary Warbler? Give us a bit of an idea about the nestlings first, and then let's talk about the adult birds.
Yeah, so for brown-headed cowbirds and just cowbirds in general, a common misconception is that cowbirds toss the eggs out of the nest or the nestlings out of the nest. I see this all the time on like Facebook pages where people are like, "Oh, I saw this weird egg in the nest," and someone comments like, "It's a or it's a cowbird," and they'll toss the nestlings out of the nest. They never do that. They are nestmate sharers. They actually do better for the most part with other nestlings in the nest. And I also want to point out, if you ever find a cowbird egg, like if you're in the United States and you ever find a cowbird egg in a nest that's, in your backyard or something, it's actually illegal for you to remove it because cowbirds are a native species and they're protected by the Migratory Bird Act. So you can't ever remove cowbird eggs or touch them. So, the cowbirds are nestmate sharers. And like I said, usually the sort of optimal situation is they're in the nest with nestlings that are kind of near the same size, but a little bit smaller. So warblers are, they're not completely dwarfed by the cowbird, but they're definitely smaller. And so the cowbirds actually do better when they have a few warbler nestmates, because the warbler nestmates help stimulate the parents to bring a lot of food to the nest, and then the cowbird can actually kind of intercept a lot of those feedings, from the warblers, because the cowbirds are up a little bit higher. They've got a bigger gate. They're more towards the front, and so they can actually get a lot of the feeds from the parents. So I think. Does that answer your first question?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good summation of how things happen, and that that's a real significant difference about the cowbird and the cuckoo in general. And I don't think all cuckoos are the same, but a pair of cowbirds finding a warbler nest does not mean that it's a catastrophe for that pair. It just means that the likelihood of success for that season is going to be a little bit less. Like they might get a 40% success rate rather than an 80 or 90% success rate from what they have laid. I mean, it's so Don't hate the cowbird, I think is the message, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, as far as bird parasites go, they're one of the nicest because, a lot of cuckoo species toss out all the, um, for example, did I break up? Okay, no, I'm still here. You froze for a second, just making sure. A lot of, so there's other brood parasites like honey guides, which actually have like a little hook at the end of their bill that they use to destroy the eggs or like bludgeon the other nestlings to death. So cowbirds are definitely one of the nicest brood parasites. And then you were asking about cuckoos. So we do have cuckoos that live around here. I've seen yellow-billed cuckoos around a lot, but they are not the sort of obligate brood parasite cuckoos that you're thinking of. So obligate brood parasite, that just means that their only method of reproduction is brood parasitism. They never actually care for their own offspring. The cuckoos around here actually build their own nests and take care of their young, but they might parasitize each other's nests.
Wow, that's interesting. And for international listeners, in Australia, cuckoos are the same as Hannah's calling cuckoos. It's just our accent, so we don't spell it differently or anything like that. We're just lazy with our mouths. What is that cuckoo species that you have in your study area, Hannah?
Yeah, they're yellow-billed cuckoos. And yeah, I hear them around a lot. I see them occasionally. They're a little bit secretive. And I believe we also have black-billed cuckoos in the area, but I haven't actually seen them around.
Now, not being familiar with the black-billed cuckoo, I'm going to think that they eject eggs or nestlings, that the cuckoo chick has that regular cuckoo behaviour. Do you know? Is that?
Yes, so black-billed and yellow-billed cuckoos do raise their own offspring. They build their own nest, raise their own offspring. I think they do. I believe there's accounts they might parasitize each other a little bit.
Each other, but not.
But they don't have any, nest mate ejection behavior.
Okay. I need to look more into that to see whether maybe North American cuckoos are substantially different to European cuckoos, because we've all seen that kind of video where the cuckoo chick will either throw an egg or a nestling out using its back and whatnot. Pretty amazing gymnastics going on within the nest. Look, it's off the cowbird topic again, but are there cuckoo species operating in your patch that parasitize the Prothonorary Warbler?
Nope, we don't have any cuckoos that are parasitizing other species here. Yeah, it's the only obligate brood parasite, again, meaning the only bird that reproduces solely via brood parasitism is the brown-headed cowbird. That's the only one we have here.
Okay. Can we go back a little bit to your field work, or really your lab work? What are you using? You mentioned that you're using the trap with the nest, the bag, or an automatic lid, which is trapping the birds. You mentioned that you're using mist nets. Are you using any camera traps, acoustic recorders, and things like that within your lab to broaden the types of data that you are collecting on either of the species?
Yeah, so for the traps and everything that I'm using, essentially I just do it just to ban the birds and get a blood sample, so that way I can actually do genetic work and see if there's any warblers in the nest that are extra pair, meaning that they were fathered by someone who is not the father that's taking care of them. but like I said, the other graduate student in my lab who's worked down here, Nick Antonsen, he's done a lot of camera work with the cowbirds, and I believe we're using some other methods in the lab. I have a few other lab mates that are using, I believe it's not GPS, but I think it's like radio tracking some of the birds. I believe another lab mate is maybe using some more cameras. So we definitely kind of have a diversity of tracking methods that are going on in the lab.
Yeah, it's really interesting to know how different teams are utilising the tech and adding to that great store of knowledge. The the blood samples that you take,
Mm-hmm.
are you also, apart from genetic typing and matching, as you mentioned, are you doing any health analyses, or is it only the steroidal and then the genetic information that you're after?
Yeah, so far I haven't done any sort of other, yeah, like looking at like blood parasites or things like that. I haven't done that kind of work yet. Yeah, mostly I use the blood for genetics and then also to help sex the chicks because we can't actually tell the difference between male and female warblers. Male and female cowbirds, the males are usually bigger than the females, but still it's better to have that blood sample to make sure that that's the sex of the chick.
Have you gone far enough down the road yet with your genetic work to have any interesting discoveries, or do you know, have you worked out any interesting relationships within the population of cowbirds in your patch?
Yeah, so I haven't done genetic work with the cowbirds yet. I've just used the blood samples for sexing
From
so
the
far.
Okay,
And so that was actually in a fledging experiment that I've done where I had the cowbirds and the warblers had those pit tags. So I actually knew when they fledged. And so one thing that I found is that if you're a warbler in the nest with a cowbird, you actually fledge at an older age than if you're a warbler without a cowbird. And it's probably because you're kind of suffering these sort of growth defects. You're not growing as quickly because you have this, huge competition with a
yeah, the
cowbird.
effect of competition. Absolutely,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. How many days do you think they're delayed in fledging?
They were delayed. I believe the effect size was about half a day with the ages that they were fledging at.
Okay. Um, with that kind of experiment, and actually, can we in a minute maybe talk about how you design an experiment like that? But
Yeah.
I imagine that you need to repeat that in different seasons because it, birds, the nestlings grow. You can't go
Mm-hmm.
back and repeat it unless that uh, the occupants of that nest, that warblers, that hollow or that nest box, raise a subsequent clutch. So, does that make it difficult for you to draw conclusions, or do you just have to be satisfied with making observations?
Yeah, so that the fledging experiment took course over the years of 2020 and 2021. So that actually did account for multiple seasons. And something that was kind of interesting was we had really different sex ratios between those 2 years. Because if you're a field biologist, you know that every year is kind of different as far as the weather and things, there's so many different variables that can change. And so, that was kind of one interesting thing that I'm not entirely sure what the cause of that was, but just kind of, an interesting variation. Um, but yeah, there's other data that I've been gathering for several years on the warblers. Some of that is just to get a larger sample size. And then, like you said, some of it is just so you can have the data that is kind of more generalizable and not just specific to a certain year. But sometimes experiments can be done in a single year, and you can feel, at least somewhat confident with those results that that would be repeatable.
Hannah, I just might take this opportunity to let the people who are watching know that you're welcome to make a comment or ask a question. If there's things that you desperately want to know and that I'm not asking, feel free to interject yourself, because I think we've got. Are you the world's expert on Prothonorary Warblers and brown-headed cowbirds? Is there anybody else who can rival your expertise, Hannah?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the world expert, because there are several researchers that have worked in the system, and actually I've learned a lot from them. Like one of my committee members, Wendy Shelsky, and actually her husband, Jeff Hoover, have done a ton of work down here. And he actually was one of the researchers that worked a lot with the mafia hypothesis down here.
Now, so let me stop you there, because I was, of course, being facetious, because research in ornithology is always a process of building on the people that have been working on these species or in these habitats before. Tell us about the mafia theory.
Yes, I think you mentioned it like very briefly in the Prothonorary Warbler episode. And mafia hypothesis is something that is just, it's the coolest thing. Everyone likes to talk about it. So essentially, the mafia hypothesis is a way for cowbirds to potentially enforce hosts to accept their egg, even if the host recognizes it as a parasitic egg. So the mafia hypothesis, there's also another hypothesis that's called the farming hypothesis. So if a cowbird missed the nest, the sort of window to parasitize a nest, it can destroy the nest and then make that, host sort of re-nest, have another nesting cycle, and then the cowbird can actually parasitize that nest on the second go around. So that's a farming hypothesis. The mafia hypothesis is actually different in that the cowbird parasitizes the nest, the host removes it, then the cowbird destroys the nest, not particularly to parasitize it again, but to kind of enforce host acceptance, so that the next time the host gets a cowbird egg, it thinks, last time my entire nest got destroyed, this time maybe I'll just raise the cowbird, and maybe like one or two of my own nestlings will get outcompeted, but I'll still have more success than if I remove it. And so the experiment that was done down here was with experimental sort of manipulations of removing cowbird eggs. And so what was found is that the nests where cowbird eggs got removed were predated at higher rates than nests that had cowbird eggs that stayed, or nests that never got cowbird eggs. And so it's the thought that maybe the cowbirds are coming back, and so they see that their egg is gone and they just destroy the whole nest.
How often do you think that the mafia technique is employed by cowbirds? Like, do they all do it if they've had a failure, or is it only some portions of the population that do it?
Yeah, so from my own experience, it's probably somewhat of, it might be somewhat dependent on the population of cowbirds, or, it might be specific to some cowbirds, because like I said, for my experiments, I've been moving cowbird eggs around a lot. And I can't think of specific nests where I actually removed the cowbird egg where the whole nest got predated or destroyed. So, and I'm actually working in some of the same sites that study was done. So it might be a kind of a behavior that's a little bit more specific to, a certain group of cowbirds than a behavior that's really done by every single cowbird.
Do you think I'm fascinated about how it would be passed on and within, say, within a population or between generations. So, do you have a view on whether it would be a learned behaviour or something that is innate?
Yeah, it could definitely have somewhat of a learning component. We've definitely cowbirds, sort of, multiple female cowbirds arriving to a nest. We know that there could be some social learning where younger females are kind of learning from older females about which, host might be appropriate, or, even like the timing of laying. And so it could very potentially be a behavior that is sort of maybe learned from one cowbird to another. But we just don't know enough about it to really say for sure.
Okay. I just want to digress for just a minute, if you don't mind. Hannah, you mentioned in a geographical term, you said down here. Now being in Australia and looking at a map of the US, I think Illinois is up there. But
yeah.
But you flip the way we talk about geography, I think, don't you? In that, if you're at the north, you're down there, and if you're in the south, it's like up there. Is that right?
I think I'm saying down here because so the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where I'm based, is actually mid-Illinois, and I'm working in southern Illinois, where there's swamps and forests, because actually most of central Illinois is very agricultural.
So you have the same.
South. Yeah.
So you have the same perspective that we do when we look at a map, because I'm down in the south of Australia and we're down the bottom. We're down here. And Queensland, Northern Territory, the tropics, up there. So yeah, I just wasn't sure if that was the tense that you were using, but you're down in the swamp in Illinois.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, people may not have listened or seen the conversation I had with Jared Hitching about the Prothonorary Warbler on World Migratory Bird Day. You spend a lot of time in swamps, don't you? Because that's where the warblers like to be.
Yeah, just during the summer, though.
Yeah. I mean, because in the winter they're gone, right? Let's assume people haven't seen that conversation. Where do the Prothonorary Warbler go? I know we briefly talked about it and I glossed over it, but your population is one that is sort of extends into Canada, but how long do they hang around and where do they go?
Yeah, so the birds get here usually, the first males might start arriving like at the beginning of April, and then they'll move out. I think one time I left some RFID loggers up and the batteries ended up actually lasting quite a while. And so I actually caught a few birds on the RFID loggers at the end of August. They might stay maybe I would predict maybe early September, but for the most part, they're kind of moving out by then, and they're much more quiet. They're not singing as much, so you don't really notice them.
And they go down as far as I think sort of Costa Rica, Belize. Is that right?
Yeah, so they usually, I think a lot of them go to Colombia. So yeah, they move compared to the cowbirds, they move much farther south. Yeah. Okay. Did you, there was a really cool eBird report from maybe a month ago of a male Prothonorary warbler that was actually spotted near Antarctica. So
Oh, yeah, that's right. Actually, I'll include that in the when I get around to writing up the web page. But yeah, I'll put that in. I think it was uh, I don't know how close to Antarctica, but it was certainly in the heading into the subantarctic zone of
yeah.
South America. So probably caught in a storm of some sort. But yeah, lovely vagrant record.
Yeah, or maybe he just got, confused about which way to go. He thought he was going north, but actually going south. I have to admit, I was a little bit happy that I didn't see bands on him, because if he was one of the birds that I have banded and known, I would have been pretty sad.
And well, no records either for on your RFID tags
Yeah.
for that season. It it sort of does raise all kinds of issues or all kinds of questions about what we don't actually know about migratory birds, because
Hmm.
some of these ranges may be far more extensive than we realise, but it needs people who are able to recognise the birds and then are interested enough to give a give a toss about what they're doing to actually make a record. So, and I know, look, it's not scientific analysis, but I do a show about birds, this stuff. But then when I look at my stats, South America and Africa are the places where people are not listening. Now, that probably tells me that the general populations there are probably not taking too much notice of the birds that are around them. And if they are, they're probably not making records of it and communicating it to people like yourself. Whereas, in Europe and, parts of Australia, obviously North America, people are keenly aware of what's around them, what's going on, and using eBird, etc.
So I think I would say I think the people there are probably also really noticing what's going on. I think they are, lots of people there probably do know the local birds, and what's kind of going on. It may just be more about
That
access
that's right.
to
It's a
those sort of,
disconnect with
yeah.
the technology and the reporting back of records. Yeah, I wasn't trying to say they don't know the birds around them. It's just that there's a disconnect between the information that is held in those communities and those populations, and actually the academic community and the formal birdwatching community, which is keeping amazing records around the world. So that prompts me to ask you about citizen science and cowbirds, Prothonorary Warblers, and your lab.
Mhm.
Is there any significant citizen science projects going on that run in tandem or crossover with your work, Hannah?
I don't currently have a citizen science aspect to the research that I'm doing, as far as like, I don't have any sort of like, I'm not using like eBird reports or something like that. I definitely love connecting with the public. Like I love using my Twitter to try and kind of share my experiences, and, oh, this is, kind of the world through the eyes of a field biologist. And you might never get to see like nest contents or birds really up close in the hands and stuff like that. So I definitely do try to connect with people that way. And as far as other members in the lab, I don't currently know of anyone who is using those sort of like public eBird reports or something like that. But I would say that we definitely are really interested in outreach, and some of us give a lot of talks, or are really active on Twitter, and so we really like connecting that way.
What's the conservation status of the brown-headed cowbird?
Yeah, so cowbirds are least concern. Most bird species are actually there was that that paper that came out, I don't know, maybe it was a year or two ago, that most bird species are declining. We've lost quite a few birds in the last couple of decades, but as far as cowbirds go, we're not particularly concerned about them as a species. Like, they're doing pretty well.
Something that we've talked about a lot on this show, and with the focus on World Migratory Bird Day just a matter of weeks back, do cowbirds suffer from bird strike as much as many of the other migratory species? Like, are you anecdotally aware of them being significant victims of collisions with buildings and interference with light at night and all those issues that we are all becoming increasingly aware of?
Yeah, anecdotally, I don't think that they probably are more at risk for those sort of things. We've actually done a bird strike survey on University of Illinois' campus, where we volunteers have been walking around buildings and actually picking up, identifying the birds, and then we're also been collecting them to use as specimens. And so a lot of those have been like migratory warblers. There's been a lot of things like woodpeckers or like thrushes, but I don't actually remember if we've had any cowbird window strikes.
Okay, well, that's good news. Hannah, can I ask you a couple of questions that I like to ask all of my guests?
Yeah, sure.
Would you call yourself a bird nerd?
I would call myself a bird nerd. I do think I'm a bird nerd, yeah.
So do you go bird watching for pleasure as well as for your academic pursuits?
Yeah, I don't think I'm quite as much of a birder as a lot of other people are. I'm kind of more of a, like, I'm not someone who like hears about like a rare bird that's like 2 hours away and like immediately hop in a car and go and see it. But I really do love, I'm super into walking. Like, I love to just go out on walks like multiple times a day. And so I'm really aware of the birds that are around me, and I like to kind of passively bird watch that way. But as far as, sort of the, like counting, the birds that I see, or like being super up to date on my life list, I'm a little bit lacking in those areas.
Yeah. So you can't tell me your life number, and you don't have a yard list with a total that you're maintaining.
Yeah, I don't know my number off the top of my head, but I have some birds that I've been excited to see, and I have birds that I'd really love to see. But
well, that leads us into the bucket list bird. What's your bucket list bird?
I would really love to see some cuckoos, honestly. Like I said, I've seen the cuckoos around here, but like seeing a brood parasitic cuckoo, I think would be really cool. I mean, most of them are very gorgeous birds. If I could see like just a massive common cuckoo, like nestling, in like a reed warbler nest that's almost like collapsing, I would be pretty happy.
I think on World Migratory Bird Day, I think it was 2021. I don't think it was 2020, that far back. I spoke with Terry Townsend, who is based in China, and we talked about swifts and cuckoos, Eurasian cuckoos, which migrate into Beijing each year, and the school kids around there get very familiar with some of their cuckoos, and they're doing banding and tagging and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And one that he gave me a picture of, and I'll share it with you on Twitter, was I don't know if you ever heard about the naming of the tug, I think in London, that was Boaty McBoatface, a public competition. Oh, yeah. And that was rejected. Well, at around the same time, one of their cuckoos was Flappy flap face or something. So I've got a picture of him. So you can, I think it was a him. You can check out that Eurasian cuckoo, and maybe a trip to China is on the cards for you, and you could do a bit of cross cultural and species sharing of information, because there's no cowbirds in China, are there?
No, there aren't. Yeah, and China has a lot of, they have several brood parasitic cuckoos, not even just the one, because here it's, the only brood parasite we have in this location is just the brown-headed cowbird. So it would be super cool to see, an area where you've got like multiple, obligate brood parasites working in tandem.
What's your bucket list location to go birding? Actually, because you're probably going to apply your research brain to that question as well. Have you got a bucket list research location as well as maybe a birding for pleasure location?
I don't know if I have a bucket list research location. I think that would kind of be dependent on the birds. But I think somewhere where I could see like a lot of endemic bird species, like New Zealand, would be super cool.
Yeah, New Zealand is pretty amazing, and actually that whole all the Pacific Islands and whatnot have such specializations amongst groups, maybe complexes. I don't ever get that terminology right, Hannah. That's why I get people like you to talk about it.
Yeah. Australia would be really cool too. I would love to see I would love to see wild parrots. We actually the Carolina parakeet actually apparently had a range that extended into southern Illinois. So if it wasn't extinct, maybe I would be seeing it, but I mean, somewhere where I could see parrots doing their thing would be so cool too.
Hannah, does that mean you haven't listened to the Carolina parakeet episode of the Bird Emergency?
No, I don't think I have.
Tut, tut, tut. Tut, tut, tut. We did talk an awful lot about the historical range of the Carolina parakeet. So check it out. You too, dear listener.
Yeah, I will have to.
Have you got a favourite piece of equipment that you use when you're out in the field?
Favorite piece of equipment? I'm not sure. I mean, I love write in the rain notebooks because I have dropped them multiple times in the water and they turn out fine. I actually had a field tech one time wash his, like it went through the washer and the dryer and it ended up perfectly fine. So as a field biologist, having a way to record data that's not going to immediately turn to mush if you drop it in the water is really great. Other than that, I mean, yeah, I love having my phone on me so I can take pictures, of interesting things when I see them. Because another really cool thing about Southern Illinois is there's such a diversity of like frogs and snakes and turtles, and I love to, be able to identify them when I'm out in the field. But other than that, I'm not sure if I have anything super specific that I have on me. I always carry filament tape on me, I guess. And so that's it's always really helpful to repair things if I need to, because it's a really kind of strong type of tape. So that's also one thing I probably always carry on me.
In this part of the world, we call that gaffer tape. I'm interested in that Write in the Rain notebook that went through the washing machine.
Yeah.
The physical item survived, but did any of the data on those pages survive?
Yeah, it was all written in pencil, so
wow,
all of it looks perfect. Yeah.
That is amazing. That is amazing. I've never actually handled one, so that's something for me to look forward to there, Hannah. I wonder if you've got sort of a bucket list project, because you have to have sort of a multi-season approach. So, are you looking to extend the cowbird and Prothonorary warbler work a lot further, or would you like to maybe switch tacks and find a research project on the Norfolk Island parakeet, or the Kia in New Zealand, or get on the Kakapo recovery team?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the future holds for me, if I'll keep working in this system for a postdoc or, like future research or not. It's certainly a great system to work in because I don't have to nest search. I just have nest boxes. So if you're a researcher listening and you have to nest search, I really feel for you. I'm so glad that I don't have to do it. And I mean, they're just great birds. We can bother them multiple times a day at the nest to check on it or fix something, and they don't abandon. And the males and females are sexually dimorphic, so we can actually tell them apart. I mean, there's just really a lot to love about the warblers. I mean, I've built up, a lot of data sort of on their movements that I'm really interested in looking at. But if I really could, I've always, wanted to work a little bit more with the cowbirds. But like I said, they are kind of a hard bird to really catch and study, at least where I'm at. So if I could have like every female cowbird pit tagged and then see kind of what their movements are, and if there's like social learning between them, or younger females are, following older females or something like that, or, when they're checking up on their nest or their eggs or something, that would be so cool. I would really love to have that data.
I just wanted to draw people's attention to your Twitter feed, which is really, really cool. What's your Twitter handle, Hannah? Because it's not really that easy, is it? Because you've got the underscore at the end.
Yeah, I guess there's too many Hannah Scharfs, so I couldn't have like a really nice, tidy Twitter handle. My Twitter handle is Hannah, my first name HANNAH _ Scharf SCHARF, and then another underscore at the end.
I'm going to make it really easy for people, Hannah. I'll create this for you later on. thebirdemergency.com/Hannah Twitter. That will take you to Hannah's Twitter, and you can check it out. Only two more questions, Hannah, and they're basically versions of the same one. Which is the better bird, the brown-headed cowbird or the Prothonorary warbler?
Oh my gosh, it's like picking between my two children. I think it's so funny that I study probably one of the most charismatic bird species and then simultaneously one of the most hated bird species. I mean, I had someone ask me on Twitter the other day, they were like, Prothonorary warblers are popping up all over my Twitter. Like, what does everyone love about them? And it's just, I don't know. I think they're beautiful, and there's sort of these habitat specialists, and so they're kind of a treat to see, and they're kind of easy to identify, and so everyone just loves the Prothonorary warblers. Or like if there's an article on migratory birds, it's always a picture of a Prothonorary warbler, and then everyone, I mean, sometimes I'll get replies to my tweets about cowbirds, just like, oh, we should kill them all, or these birds are evil, or things like that. Birds aren't moral beings. I think cowbirds are really cool birds. I think that they get a lot of hate that they don't deserve, just because that's the reproductive strategy. I don't see people getting mad at raptors for eating my warblers. So, don't get mad at the cowbirds for doing what they do. So I don't know that I can pick a favorite, because I kind of love them both for different reasons.
I just hope that nobody who says bad things about cowbirds has got a cat. That would just be my thought. I mean, it's a bit of ethical gymnastics to hold that view.
Yeah.
Anyway, cat lovers of the world will hate me. I'm not saying bad things about cats, but
have an outdoor cat.
Yeah. But
indoor cats are fine.
That's right, but predators are predators. It's in their nature. Yeah. So you can't hate the bird for their nature. You can you can wish the Prothonorary Warbler or the robin or, I don't know, the cardinals or buntings in this group as well. I don't know, but you can wish them well, but you don't have to hate the cowbird. Especially, they're nice. They don't.
Yeah, they're one of the nice bird parasites, and I've seen some warblers take down some huge dragonflies and just beat them to death on a branch and rip them apart like piece by piece. I mean, they can be vicious in their own right. Yeah.
Absolutely too true. Hannah, just to follow on from that question, what's the best bird?
Oh, yeah, the best bird. I have birds that I really like, but I don't know if I have a best bird. Like, for example, I always love seeing woodpeckers. I never get tired of seeing woodpeckers. Even like really common around here is downy woodpecker. I still get excited every time I see them. We have hummingbirds here, which I always love seeing hummingbirds in the summer. So I have birds that I really like to see, but I don't know if I have a favorite.
Do you put a feeder out in your garden?
I'm in an apartment, so I don't have a yard to put a feeder out in, but definitely if I had a yard, I would for sure put a feeder out because I'd love to see what comes around.
And of course, I've asked one question after the last question. I have to ask you about apartment living when you are a committed bird nerd. Have you adopted a local park or something like that to go and get your bird fix, or is the field work enough?
The field work definitely is really nice because I get to see the birds so close and so hands-on. But the neighborhood that I'm in has a lot of like really old, tall trees, and there's a lot of sort of not the very manicured grass lawns. There's a lot of different sort of plant life around. So actually the birds around there are still pretty nice to see. And I have birds all around my apartment still, which is nice.
Fantastic. All right, Hannah, I think we've done cowbirds to death. Something we would say here when we've come to the end. 5th year Ph.D. student Hannah Scharf from the Cowbird Lab at the University of Illinois. Hannah, I won't ask you to spell out the Cowbird Lab webpage, but I will also make sure that it is linked on thebirdemergency.com/cowbirds so people can check out your work. It's been great to meet you. I'm so glad that I saw your stuff on Bird Twitter and around the same time as World Migratory Bird Day, and that we could jam it in with the conversation that I had with your neighbour, I would imagine. How far is your place from Springfield, where Jared Hitchings hangs out?
It's not super close. So we're definitely not living in the same town or anything, but the same sort of general area where we're seeing the same types of birds and everything. Yeah.
And we did, of course, talk a lot about Prothonorary Warbler nesting and whatnot. Jared sent me a pile of pictures of the nest boxes that he and his family and friends make and put up, and all the different sightings and whatnot. So thebirdemergency.com/prow, PROW, is where you can check out all of those visuals. And I'm pretty sure Hannah's going to give me some more so that thebirdemergency.com/cowbirds will be full of a whole lot of stuff that you can use when you follow along with this discussion on the website or in your headphones in the podcast feed. Anywhere else you would like people to check out, Hannah, before we sign off?
No, I mean, if you look at my Twitter and follow my Twitter, I have also like I'll share with you. I have hundreds of photos. I also share a lot of those photos and some videos along with kind of information about what's going on my Twitter. So if you just go through my media on my Twitter, I've got loads of cool photos.
Well, that's great. I'll I'll beg, borrow, and steal as much as I can use, and we'll turn the birdemergency.com/cowbirds into a place of cowbird love, not cowbird hate.
That's great to hear.
You can catch up with everything Bird Emergency at thebirdemergency.com. Please subscribe to YouTube, thebirdemergency.com YouTube, because when I get some more subscribers, I get to do a few more groovy things on YouTube, and it's all about spreading the word and sharing the love of our birdie friends. Bird Nerd Trivia as well. That is back. Photography Friday is on its way back, and Tour Guide Thursday is on its way back because, Hannah, we've survived election season in Australia, and I was putting so much energy into getting some real change for conservation, climate change, and biodiversity, and it's happened. So now the focus can go back onto birds. Thanks so much for joining me, Hannah. It's been a delight. I've really enjoyed meeting you. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. I'm Grant Williams. I'm a bird nerd. That's been Hannah Scharf. I knew I was going to do that. Hannah Scharf. It's terrible. Does that happen all the time, Hannah?
Yeah, it happens a lot, actually.
I'm really sorry because I've written it out clearly here. I've tried so hard, but I think when you're trying not to say something, it's the first thing you say.
Yeah.
Hannah Scharf.
Well, you got it right after, so that's better than most.
Well, at least I recognise I got it wrong. Final question, Hannah. I should have asked it earlier on. When will you be completing your PhD? When will we be calling you Dr. Hannah?
Probably, definitely within the next 2 years. Probably next year, in the summer.
Fabulous. Completing your PhD fieldwork in the time of a pandemic. I take my hat off to you. Lots of perseverance. Terrific stuff. I'm Grant Williams. This is the Bird Emergency. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye-bye.